Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Life and Legacy Show, sponsored by the Sechler Law Firm, where great families make great estate plans. My name is Tim Sechler. I am the host of this little radio show where I give you the information you need in order to make a great decision for your family. So I own an estate planning and elder law firm in Cranberry Township. We serve the greater Western Pennsylvania area from there with a couple satellite offices. And one of the things that I believe is that people should make well-informed decisions. You know, this stuff can get pretty complicated. I feel like educated decisions are typically better decisions. Whether you decide to do a certain recommendation or not, I want you to understand it. And so at our law firm, we put out tons and tons of content. You can find, I think we're at like 175 radio shows at this point. Most of that is available on YouTube as our video podcast. And just follow us on social media, SechlerLawFirm.com. We also have an ongoing membership program that we do with our clients called the Red Wagon Club to keep people informed and educated, because when estate planning is done properly, it is not a transaction, right? In law school, they talk about estate planning as what's called transactional law, meaning you buy some set of documents. Once you have your documents, that's the end of the transaction. That's the end of the relationship with the attorney. Yeah, I don't think it really should work that way. I feel like estate planning, when done properly, like this isn't just some set of documents you put on a shelf and leave it there for 20 years. You know, we need to make updates. Changes occur in the law. Changes occur in your family. And your estate plan needs to reflect that. So that's our commitment to our clients. We do that through a thing called the Red Wagon Club, which continues to run our clients through a series of classes. So remember what I said at the beginning. I consider ourselves to be an education-first law firm. So at our law firm, unlike most law firms, we do most of our work in a classroom. We have an event center in Cranberry Township where we teach a series of classes to our clients about taxes, about estate planning, about the different ways that you can protect yourself from things like the nursing home, long-term care costs. Because it seems to me that why would we charge somebody for education if we can do the education for free in a class? And so we continue to sort of honor that idea by putting on tons and tons of content. So check us out. Go to SechlerLawFirm.com, SECHLER lawfirm.com, where you can register for our first workshop in the series of classes called The 3 Secrets to Protect Your Legacy. So check that out at SechlerLawFirm.com. We hope to see you at one of the upcoming workshops where we keep people informed on their options. And so one of the things I want to do with this week's show is keep you informed on a couple of different options that a couple of different things I've seen in the news in the last couple of weeks. One of which is the annual increase in your Social Security check. So if you're a retiree relying on Social Security in retirement, the idea here is every year they do a cost of living adjustment to upward, or I suppose downward, adjust your Social Security check to keep up with the cost of living. Right now, if you're paying attention to your pocketbook, you know things are more expensive than they used to be. Right? Inflation has been a problem over the last few years, continues to seem to be a problem, and so prices are going up. And so then you would assume that your Social Security check should go up. Right? I mean, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk costs a heck of a lot more money right now than it did a year ago. And so great. Obviously, they're going to give us a big bump in the Social Security check, right? Well, unfortunately, the uptick in your Social Security check this year is only 2.5%. Now, you tell me if you feel like your cost of living only increased by 2.5% this year. I mean, that seems to be a pretty standard number, and this was not a standard year. And so expect going into 2025, the rest of the year, this year, that you are going to find it a little tighter to make ends meet if you rely only on or primarily on Social Security, because this is lip service. This isn't a real inflation adjustment. This is something other than that. And so, whatever you want to make of that, not really a political show, but most people, I think you're going to find that's kind of an insufficient adjustment in your cost of living for what you've experienced in the last year. So that's good news. What else is going on in the news this week? Well, last week, I suppose, there was a new law to bring back the federal estate tax. Oh, now this is exciting. they're going to tax you again if you pass away with too much money. Now, I just want to think about this for a second, because estate taxes, death taxes, are incredibly unpopular, okay? But here's the sneaky thing about them. They don't really impact you during your life, right? So they're unpopular, but people don't complain about them quite enough. And so Pennsylvania has a death tax. It's called the inheritance tax. If you pass away as a Pennsylvania resident, someone is likely to pay some death tax. Pennsylvania's rate, if you leave stuff to your spouse, is 0. If you leave stuff to your kids or grandkids, lineal descendants, they get hit with a 4.5% death tax, which is a shame in my opinion. If you don't leave it to kids or descendants, you can pay a 12% inheritance tax if you leave money to your siblings, and 15% to pretty much anyone else, nieces, nephews, friends, neighbors, significant others to whom you are not married. You pass away, you leave them some stuff because you love them. Well, Pennsylvania loves that you love them too, and they hit you with a 15% inheritance tax. Okay, now that's a pretty unpopular thing. The Pennsylvania inheritance tax is a pretty unpopular thing. I mean, why are you taxing me? Because I was able to save some money during my life. I was able to do it right. I was able to put a little money in the bank. And now when I pass away, you're going to take it from my kids? You know, when you think about this whole war in the middle class thing, and how is a family, how is the next generation supposed to be doing better than the previous generation? I think that most of us have sort of this idea that, hey, if there's some leftovers when I'm done with my retirement, when I pass away, I'd like for that money to get to my family. I don't want it to go to the government because they can't spend, they're just going to blow it. I want it to go to my kids. And of course that's what we want, because we want a better future for our families. Well, yeah, except Uncle Sam and I guess the folks in Harrisburg, they want a better future too. And so they're talking about a death tax again. So here we go, the federal estate tax. Let's do a history of the federal estate tax. The idea behind this tax is that if you pass away with too much money, they're going to tax you on that money, okay? And back in the late 1990s, a lot of people had to pay a federal estate tax. Now, not a majority of the population, but the federal estate tax limits used to be in the $600,000 or $700,000 range, because if you owned a house, you have a retirement account, some life insurance proceeds, some savings. A lot of people get to $600,000 or $700,000 in net worth. Not everybody, for sure, but a lot of people, a significant percentage of the population, can come up with that kind of money. And so when this tax hits, it's ugly, because what has to happen? We have to pay this tax within a defined period of time. Well, if you have $700,000, let's say you have $1 million, right? If there's a family listening to the show that has $1 million, well, that's not just sitting around in cash, right? That might be an investment account. That might be in real estate. That might be in a company that your family owns. It's in something other than cash, more than likely. But see, this tax is due within a defined period of time. So how are we going to come up with the cash to pay the tax? Well, that means we got to sell something. We got to sell the stock. We got to sell the real estate. We got to sell the family business to come up with the cash to make sure that Uncle Sam doesn't come after us. Well, is that right? You talk about farmers for a second. Multi-generational farmers. The farmer's been in the family for a long time. Family passes away with too much money. Uncle Sam wants his pound of flesh. Where can we get the money? Because farmers, generally speaking, are real estate rich and cash poor. They don't typically have money sitting around to write big, multiple six-figure checks. And so now we got to sell the family farm to some developer. And, this to me is like the saddest thing going on out there. When the family business has to sell, the family house has to sell, the family farm has to sell in order to placate the folks in D.C. rather than provide that asset to to the next generation. This is just, in my opinion, a total travesty, and I hate death taxes. I hate death taxes, and so, but I'm not the only one. So, during the George W. Bush administration, the second Bush presidency, they changed it because this thing was so unpopular. So they moved the lifetime exemption from around $1 million to $5 million, and then they indexed it for inflation. Excuse me. They indexed it for inflation. Well, okay, great. So $5 million. Now that's a pretty hefty number, $5 million, and especially since husband and wife, if you're married, both people get a $5 million exemption. So that's $10 million per family before we're paying any federal estate tax, which reduced the risk of paying the tax to a very small percentage of the population. And that was a pretty popular move because if we're being honest, nobody likes the idea of a death tax. I don't care if I'm not asking you if you don't have that kind of money. I'm not asking you necessarily to feel sympathy for people who have a bunch of money. Although I don't have that kind of money. I'd love to have that kind of money, but I'm not mad at people who do, right? And when I was talking about the inheritance tax a little bit, the Pennsylvania death tax that pretty much applies to everyone. Well, I'm not happy about that, and I equally would not be happy about a federal estate tax if it applied to me. So they moved it to $5 million. It's indexed for inflation through the Bush years, the Obama years. It was meant to end during the Obama administration. Okay, so if you're a history buff back, and you don't have to think back that long. It's only 10 years ago or so, but there was a thing that was called the end of the Bush tax cuts. The end of the Bush tax cuts. So included in the Bush tax cuts was the lifetime exemption for the federal estate. And so, here's what I think happened. The lifetime exemption was supposed to go from around $5 million to around $1 million during the Obama administration. And what happened was, it technically did for 3 days, January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, or whatever the year was. I forget at this point. So it technically went down to $1 million. But then, here's my theory. What happened was there was a Christmas party or a New Year's Eve party in D.C., and there was a bunch of congressmen walking around and were talking to each other. And, hey, Joe. Yeah, what's up, John? Hey, well, I was reading in the news today, because I don't really know what's going on with this legislation, that the federal estate tax is ending. And this federal estate tax, it's now going to apply for people with $1 million and over. Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, John. Do you know that most congressmen retire with more than $1 million somehow? Well, yeah, I've got more than $1 million, John. Well, yeah, me too. So since we're now subject to this federal estate tax, don't you think we ought to change the law back and make ourselves not subject to a federal estate tax so our kids inherit the money? And what happened in D.C. was all the wealthy Congress people got together and decided that they didn't want to pay any federal estate tax. So they moved the number back up, right? So it went back up. During the Obama administration, they kept the $5 million number intact. That indexed for inflation over a couple years. Then President Trump comes into office, and he doubles the number. He doubles from, it would have been roughly $6 million lifetime exemption. He doubles it to about 12. It continues to grow for inflation. So here we sit in 2024, and this thing has a lifetime exemption of about $13.6 million each, which is an awful lot of money. I mean, that's a fairly wealthy family, but it's supposed to end next year. And so here we are in a period of time where these previous tax cuts, they're supposed to end next year. And out comes a piece of legislation, a proposed piece of legislation last week, introduced by Elizabeth Warren and someone else, that proposes a death tax for estates over $3.5 million. Okay, now $3.5 million. Most listeners, myself included, $3.5 million is a long way away. But $3.5 million, I don't also think is like ultra wealthy, right? I mean, my experience in doing estate planning for a long time is I got a lot of clients in this general net worth category. They work pretty hard for that money. You're talking about self-made business owners. You're talking about professionals. You're talking about people who went out and did it. We're not talking about trust fund babies and Richie Rich. We're talking about people who experienced upward mobility. They're fighting hard to save some money to provide a better future for their families. Okay, that's a $3.5 million. And here comes a proposal to impose a death tax for people over that number. Well, here's the hard part. It's a 40% tax over that number. 40%. Now, we're not talking about, Pennsylvania's death tax is 4.5%. A 40% tax over $3. So you take somebody with $5 million, okay? If you're listening to this show, odds are somebody who has $5 million. Or there, maybe somebody at work, maybe somebody at church, but there's somebody in your community who has $5 million, okay? If you've got $5 million, you're not hurting for much. Right, but when you pass away, that means you've got $1.5 million over the exemption. Okay, so 40% of 1.5 million is what, like $650,000 or so. So you're telling me that if I've got $5 million, which I would love to have $5 million, if when I pass away, from my $5 million, you're going to take $600,000 away from my children? I've been working for this money for 50 years, and you're telling me I got to pay the government $600,000? And if you have $5 million, you are pretty upset if they get this piece of legislation through. Now, most of us don't have that kind of money, but I do think that we ought to take pause for a second and recognize two things. None of us were happy when you were listening to the first half of the show when I was talking about the Pennsylvania inheritance tax. Nobody wants to pay that one. And that's only a 4.5% tax. Now, put yourself into your shoes, regardless of your net worth. Put yourself into the position of this person that has $5 million. And the government wants to take 40% of your stuff when you pass away. No thanks. This ain't right. This is not right. Right? And it gets worse because for people who are even more wealthy, you get over, I think it was about a $13 million estate. Now, that's a lot of money. $13 million. That's a lot of money. Okay. But it didn't fall from a tree. You know, if you believe what I believe, this person probably worked for it. This person probably came up with a great idea, or this person started a business, or this person did something. I mean, very few of the people with $13 million are lottery winners. So somebody worked for this money, right? Now, the death tax over that number, 60%. A 60% death tax has just been proposed in the U.S. of A 60% death tax. I mean, where are we here? Talking about taking most of someone's money when they pass away. Most of the money then over that number doesn't go to the kids. Most, 60% of the money goes to the government. And we all know how well they're spending the money. So I'm urging you to watch this stuff. I know not every listener has this kind of money, but if you happen to have this kind of money, pay attention to what they're about to do to you, or what at least a couple Congress people want to do to you. Because this is that, and if you're in the middle class, hey, don't check out on this one either, because it could be you next, because they've already done it to you. They've already put a death tax on the middle class. Now, they didn't call it that. The death tax in the middle class, they called it the Secure Act. The Secure Act. Well, who could vote against a thing called the Secure Act? So here's a little story about the Secure Act. This is the death tax on the middle class that they have already imposed. They just hide it. It's a sneaky, sneaky little tax. Okay, so let's talk about this thing for a second. It became law January 1st of 2020, and they buried it underneath all the COVID stuff that was in the news those days. Okay, but it impacts your retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs. Well, who has those accounts? Middle-class Americans have those accounts. I have one of those accounts. I mean, you know, middle-class folks have retirement accounts. Okay. People with $13 million, they might have a retirement account, but that's not where the money is. You understand? This is a middle-class problem. All right? So we have these retirement accounts because 60 years ago, they didn't want the companies and the people in Washington and the powers that be wanted to get away from defined benefit plans. They wanted to get away from pensions. And so they came up with these save it on your own retirement plans, and then the company can do a contribution, and you can grow the money tax deferred, right? So you put pre-tax dollars into the account, the money can ride during your life, and then you'll, in theory, have some money for retirement. And remember, these accounts, most of them, not Roths, but traditional, it's a taxable distribution when you pull the money out. Okay. Great. So we've got retirement accounts. The American baby boomer, middle class, retirees has all of their money in home equity and retirement accounts. I mean, it's just where the money is. Right? So here we are now. We're in a situation where all the money's in these IRA. Now, one of the promises that they made to you when you were investing in these retirement accounts for the last 60 years was that when you pass away, your kids would inherit the money in what's called an inherited IRA. Okay, so dad's retirement account would essentially become the kid's retirement account. The kids were entitled to receive the distributions over the course of their life expectancy. So remember, we got to pay taxes when the money leaves this account, but the kids had their own life expectancy to pull the money out. So let's do some math here. If when my dad passes away, let's say when my dad passes away, I'm 55 years old. Well, let's say he leaves me a $200,000 retirement account. Wonderful. Thanks, Dad. Used to be the case that I could let that money ride in the market for my life expectancy. Well, let's say I can invest it at 7%. I'm picking 7% because the markets over time do 7%. I'm picking 7% because it gives me easy math, because money invested at 10% doubles every 10 years. Okay. So if when I'm 55, he leaves me $200,000. By the time I'm 65, it's $400,000. By the time I'm 75, it's $800,000. If I live to 85, we're talking about $1.6 million in this account potentially. Now, maybe that seems a little, astronomical. Cut it. Let's say it grows to $1 million. Fine. Either way, this is a marvelous opportunity for upward mobility. You talk about the war in the middle class. I want a better future for my kids. I want them to be able to move up with a better lifestyle than I have. I want them to have a better standard of living. I want them to be able to retire earlier than I'm able to retire, right? I mean, that's part of the American dream, is to provide that kind of future for our family. And the IRAs were going to be the ticket, because it's where your money is. And so you're going to leave these IRAs to your kids. Your kids could use your retirement account as their retirement account. And boy, what a beautiful situation that is. And it was so beautiful that they took it away from you with a thing called the Secure Act. Okay, so after you've been investing in these accounts for 40, 50 years, some of you, with the promise, whether you knew it or not, part of the deal was your kids were going to inherit an inherited IRA and could enjoy a lifetime stretch. That was part of the deal when you made the investment. But here you are reaching your retirement age, and they're changing the deal. So now your kids no longer receive lifetime stretch. When you pass away, your kids have to pay. Your kids have to withdraw money from that account over the first 10 years of your life, of after you've passed. 10 years of your life. After you pass away, your kids inherit the IRA account. They have to pull it out over the first 10 years that they own this contract, right? Well, what does that mean? It means, one, we lost 30 years tax-deferred growth, compounding interest in the market. Tax-deferred compounding growth is like the eighth wonder of the world, right? Well, we lose 30 years of that. The other thing that we lose is this. What are most 55-year-olds still doing? Most 55-year-olds are still working. And so now we don't get to wait till the kid doesn't get to wait until their retirement years, when their income tax bracket goes down, to pull money out of the IRA. That's how the game used to be played. You would wait and take taxable distributions after your income tax bracket went down. Now, because the money has to distribute in the first 10 years, that kid is going to take it between the age of 55 and 65, when most of them are still going to be working, which means they're already in a high income tax bracket, which means these accounts are going to get smoked. They flat out stole your retirement accounts, and you didn't even know that they did it, right? So it was not cool when they did it to the middle class with the Secure Act. It's not cool when Pennsylvania does it as an inheritance tax, and it is not cool that somebody's proposing a 60% death tax on wealthy people. Now, that's my opinion. You may disagree, but I tend to believe in people, and I tend to believe most people that have accumulated some net worth probably worked pretty darn hard for it and took some risks. And I don't think we want to live in a country. I don't want to live in a country that has a 60% death tax on the money. That ain't right. And you need to watch what these guys are doing. When someone tells you they're going to do something, don't be surprised when they do it. And so here are some senators proposing a 60% death tax on people. Believe them when they say it. They've already done it to the middle class with the Secure Act. And if you happen to be a person of some means, you need to be watching this thing, and you need to be vocal about it, because I don't think they should be hitting you on it. And you should also consider doing some estate planning, because I don't want your kids to lose 60% of your net worth. That's what's going on in the news. So they buried this stuff. They called it like a housing act. Had they called the Secure Act the Death Tax on the Middle Class Act, I doubt they would have got it through. But they didn't call it that. They called it the Secure Act. Well, who would vote against the Secure Act, right? I mean, this is sneaky stuff. What do we want, the Insecure Act? I mean, so now we got a situation where they're sliding this stuff in there. You're not paying attention. You're spending too much time watching the buckos lose another one, not watching what these guys are doing. And man, they're hitting you hard. So just eyes wide alert. And this is why, like with our clients, this is why we do the Red Wagon Club. This is why we do ongoing education, because the world changes over time. If you did an estate plan 10 years ago, how do you know that that's still the estate plan you should have? Estate planning is a process, not a transaction. And that's why at the Sechler Law Firm, We continue to do the education for our clients. Even after they have documents, maybe we need to update the documents. Maybe we need to amend the documents. And so if this all makes sense to you, you should check us out. Go to SechlerLawFirm.com, SECHLER lawfirm.com. We're a law firm that cares about you and your kids, and we're going to always be fighting for your best interest and keep our eyes wide open for what these guys want to do. You know, the big bad wolf wears a T-shirt that says death, taxes, and inflation, and we need to be on the lookout for this guy, and he's always looking for you. So I hope you found this entertainment. I hope you found it educational. I hope I've encouraged you to make some moves to protect yourself and your family, and I hope you join me here again next weekend. So have a great week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.